Oh my god, what is that? That, my dear friend, is change. We all know it and we all hate it. We despise change. We love familiarity. We love what we know. And when that familiarity is threatened, we cry and we crumble. We don't want change. No one ever says things were better in the good new days. We like things how they are, and we don't want change to take them from us. But that's the thing, my quivering young cowards. Change is vital. Change is how fish grew legs and walked upon the earth. Change is how people came together to create culture. Change is why you have hairs in places you didn't have hairs before. Like it or not, change is responsible for the way the universe is. Without change, you wouldn't be you. Change shaped you, molded you, and carved you into who you are today. For better or worse. Anyway, on a completely unrelated note, let's play Crash of the Titans. It has been a long time since I last played Crash of the Titans. As a kid, I remember liking it, but I also remember being confused by it. It was just so different from what I had come to expect from the Bandicoot. The original trilogy were games where the focus was on linear 3D platforming, Wrath of Cortex basically copied that and sprinkled in some extra vehicles, and Twinsanity, even though it was structured very differently and was full of gimmicks, still had a platforming focus. Crash of the Titans took a different approach, but even though it was a pretty sudden, odd change, I still remember enjoying it. But like I said, people change, so I guess we'll see if that holds up all these years later. The game begins outside the Bandicoot household. Crunch is doing some push-ups to pump up that deliciously sexy body, Crash is eating a spanner, and Coco is working on a machine that will allow her to recycle butter. Maybe she can use it to power a tractor, or force kittens to obey. Their peaceful day is interrupted when Cortex swoops in with a giant blimp that somehow none of the cast saw or heard coming until it was directly in front of their faces and shouting at them with a megaphone. Cortex announces that he's once again being a very naughty boy, and he captures Coco and Aku Aku. By throwing Coco's butter recycling machine, Crash manages to knock Aku Aku's cage loose, dropping it somewhere nearby. Crunch does nothing since he was frozen by a freeze ray, so he's just gonna chill there for the whole game. Crash sets off to find Aku Aku, rescue his butter-obsessed sister, and stop Cortex from doing whatever the hell he's up to this time. Now that's all well and good as a setup for a story, but I have one big fat stinker of a question. How in the ever-loving fuck did Cortex manage to catch Aku Aku in a cage? A cage with bars. The gaps between the bars are wider than Aku Aku himself. Surely he could just float through the gap between the bars. Even the bars themselves are wider than Aku Aku. There's nothing holding him in. He's just a plank of wood. Surely he could slide through the gaps so that he's free, and Crash can use the butter recycling machine on Coco's cage instead, rescuing her and making the rest of the journey a hell of a lot easier. Crunch can go back to his push-ups, Crash can keep munching on the spanner, and Coco can fix her presumably broken butter recycling machine. Why did he stay in there? Is it a kink? Did he just simply like the attention? He tends to fade into the background a lot in this series. He never gets the spotlight. Maybe to him, this is his moment to shine. All eyes are on him. I mean, they're on Coco as well, and she's wearing a crop top, so the bestiality pedophiles are probably looking at her, but he's there as well. He spread his feathers like a peacock, only to be captured and become a damsel in distress. This is what he wants. What a selfish prick. Wooden ass, feathery ass, diamond head ass bitch, do your job. Anyway, the game kicks off with our first level, A New Hop. It's the tutorial level, and like all tutorial levels, it tutors you. It teaches you how to play the game. But I just want to take a moment to talk about the level names in this game. What the fuck were they smoking? I get that they're all supposed to be vague references to movies and pop culture, but honestly, sometimes it just worries me. Don't eat the yellow brick load? What the fuck does that even mean? If your load is yellow and made of bricks, see a doctor. Anyway, Crash of the Titans is two things, a platformer and a beat-em-up. The platforming aspect of this game is fairly different to literally every other game in the series before this one. It's still 3D and linear, and the main goal is to reach the end of the level, but it's a different gameplay experience. Crash's moveset is entirely different. He keeps his running and his jumping, but that's it. No sliding, no body slamming, instead things like climbing ledges and wall jumping and rope swinging, and this weird spin hover move. The levels are designed to make use of these moves, and the platforming is alright, but it is a little underwhelming. Considering how great the platforming was in other entries of this series, this sort of platforming ever so slightly misses the mark. It's not especially challenging, the way the obstacles are arranged isn't really that interesting. I don't know, it just doesn't really hit for me. It's not bad, it's just very simple and basic in a way that doesn't really scratch that platforming itch. I never came out of a stretch of obstacles thinking, good golly gosh, what a tough and intricately designed platforming challenge. That was a lot of fun, and I can't wait to be confronted with more obstacles like that. Whoopity whoopity woo! It was more like a, wow, I sure did press the jump button a lot there. I think what took away from it a bit was the fact that it was just generic. If you couldn't see the game, but could still see the gameplay, no, that doesn't make sense. If you were somehow able to remove the visuals of the game and look at the pure gameplay essence and feel the rhythm and the experience of the platforming, I don't think you'd be able to tell which game it is. It barely had any of the traditional features of Crash Bandicoot platforming. For example, there are no crates. Well, there are crates, but there aren't very many of them, and they don't even matter, which is just tragic. It was one of the defining features of the series, and it's been neglected. Now they're just breakable objects in the environment. It's so sad. I genuinely do think that's part of why it feels so generic. The platforming doesn't really have an identity. It's just run-of-the-mill jumping around. It's not bad, it just isn't anything special. But there is one silver lining. When you're going through the motions of the game, doing your generic platforming, you're not just walking forward. You're also smashing shit, and picking up what I can only describe as orbs of euphoria. Mojo is this game's main collectible, and it is everywhere, and there is so much of it, and picking it up is orgasmic. It is one of the most satisfying collectibles in the history of video games, and collecting it is one of the most addicting things I've ever collected, and I frequently used to sneak into barbershops and collect people's lost hair. I've seasoned so many meals with that. Mojo is like ecstasy. It makes you feel amazing. But what else does it do? Is it just there for the sake of being there? Well, no. Mojo is not only like ecstasy, but it's also like steroids, because by collecting Mojo, Crash becomes powered up. You gain a life for every 50,000 Mojo you collect, and when that little circle on the screen fills up, Crash gains an upgrade or a new move he can perform. Health upgrades, spin upgrades, new moves and combos, that sort of thing. In a way, the Mojo makes up for the platforming's shortcomings. I wasn't concentrating on how generic the platforming actually was, because every time I saw an object, my immediate thought was, breakable object! That means more Mojo! I love Mojo! Mojo improves Crash's combat abilities. But combat abilities aren't useful in platforming, so what's the point of that? It's like improving a KFC drive-thru by installing a hydroelectric dam. Why would you do that? Well, my twitchy little cherub, the truth is platforming is only half of this game. The other half is combat. And this is really why I found this game confusing as a kid. Combat? In Crash Bandicoot? What the hell is going on? Let's figure it out. Sprinkled throughout the levels will be enemies, and often you'll need to defeat these enemies to be able to move on. In the beginning, Crash's moveset isn't all that impressive. He can do a basic 1-2 punch and a heavy kick, and that's it. But by picking up Mojo, Crash can unlock new moves and combos, such as the Norris Roundhouse, which finishes off his punch combo, and Triple Dragon, which finishes his heavy kick combo. He can also learn new moves altogether like the old school spin attack and the gyro jackhammer. These aren't devastating and stylish combos like the kind you would find in Bayonetta, for example, but for a simple beat 'em up against simple enemies, a simple combo like these ones does the job. I just have a question. Spinning is Crash's signature move. It's what he's known for, it's his whole shtick. Say the line, Bart. It's that sort of thing. Spinning is who he is. He's a spinster. So why is it that he has to unlock this move? How come it isn't an innate move in his arsenal? Why does he have to learn it? I'm happy to pick up the Mojo for it, that shit's like heroin. But surely spinning would be something he has from the get-go. And also, how come he gets dizzy from spinning? Why is that a thing? He never had that problem before. He doesn't even have enough of a brain to perceive the spinning in the first place. He shouldn't get dizzy at all. What the hell, Crash? What's happened to you? Crash's basic combos and moves are more than enough to deal with the pathetic underlings that swarm at you, but they're not Crash's only enemies. Crash also has to face off against various kinds of mutants, or titans if you will. These are much bigger and stronger foes that are tougher for Crash to deal with, and that's when Crash's middling array of moves and combos comes into play. The Norris Roundhouse doesn't work on Titans. It works on the subservient bitch rats, but the Titans are too tough for it. They defend themselves by blocking. Crash needs to use heavy attacks to break through their guard. The Titans are strong and they hit hard, so defeating them can be difficult to do, especially when you're overrun by them. But there's one combo that can basically guarantee a win, and that's the Chin Tickler. You bait the Titans into blocking the weak hits, and then break through their guards with the final strong hit, and repeat that over and over until they're beaten. There are other ways to beat them, of course, but this way I found was most effective. Crash's combat, even though it's fairly basic, still has an amount of depth to it that makes it more than simple mindless button mashing. But the real fun begins when you start jacking. I love a good jacking. When a Titan is beaten, you get the opportunity to jack it and take control of it. They're much more powerful than Crash, obviously. They have their own moves and combos, and they even have a super strong fuck you attack that can obliterate your enemies. They can also destroy giant objects in the environment to get more of that sweet, juicy mojo. And there's a pretty good amount of variety. Some are fairly similar, the Snipe, Stench, and E-Electric are all basically the same Titan in a different skin, but the rest are pretty unique both in terms of gameplay and their designs. A lot of them look really cool and unique. The Yuctopus immediately comes to mind here. A giant duck-foot tentacle monster that shoots lasers and plays the bagpipes? That's the stuff of dreams. I want one. I promise I'll feed it and walk it and love it. Some Titans can be annoying to deal with, and some are kind of boring, but most of the time they're very fun to use, especially the big fuckers. You really feel powerful when you're in control of them. So Crash of the Titans is a mix of platforming and beat-em-up gameplay. Those halves individually aren't anything overly special. The platforming on its own isn't anything amazing, and neither is the combat on its own. But together, I think it works decently well. There's a good balance between the two. It's not a situation where you have too much of one thing and not enough of the other. I think it's fairly even and they complement each other. As you approach the point where you might get bored of one half, the other half swoops in to break it up and get you back into it. And the game encourages you to explore and play well with various challenges and rewards. You've got mojo rooms that present you with a particular challenge, there are voodoo dolls hidden in each level that unlock concept art, you can unlock skins by defeating or jacking a certain amount of a particular enemy, and then you've got level performance. Your performance in a level is determined by three things: how many minions you've killed, how many spy bots you destroy, and how big your largest combo was. If you manage to meet the Minion Master, Spybot, and Combo King criteria, your performance will be ranked gold. If you only get 2 out of the 3, you get silver, 1 out of 3 bronze, and I actually don't know what happens if you don't get any. I was never that bad at the game. But all these rewards incentivize you to actually get stuck into the game's platforming and combat and try to do well. This sort of thing is where shit games like The Legend of Spyro get it wrong. Their blatant gameplay issues aside, The Legend of Spyro A New Beginning and The Legend of Spyro The Eternal Night both fuck this balance up, where they both have platforming and combat, but they go way too heavy on the combat and not heavy enough on the platforming and exploration. There also aren't really any collectibles or rewards or any incentive to actually try. You just slowly trudge your way through it until it's over. Crash of the Titans does it right. If you're going to insist on taking a beloved platforming franchise and butchering its gameplay to the point where it becomes unrecognizable, Crash of the Titans is how you do it. Unrecognizability though, that really is one of the bigger issues with this game, methinks. In isolation, this game is absolutely fine. I think it's a very well presented game. Even though it's not a particularly memorable soundtrack in terms of melodies, I found it very atmospheric and fitting to the scenarios they were applied to. And I think the sound design and music design and the overall audio language of this game is very consistent the whole way through and matches very well with the visual style. The game has a very cartoony, wacky look to it in terms of its environmental architecture and animations, and it's very colourful and vibrant. The only thing I don't like about this game's presentation is the ridiculous, and frankly offensive use of motion blur. They went so overboard with the motion blur. I felt like I was drunk while playing this game. Everything was so blurry, and sometimes I couldn't even tell what was going on. It's almost rendering all the effort they put into these environments useless because half the time you can't even look at them. Which is a shame because a lot of the environments are really fucking cool. This game went all out with wicked locations. The levels were filled with grandiosity and significant landmarks like the giant gorilla temple, an engine's statue of rocketry, and Uka Uka's tree on the cliff, and the Doominator. There's so much to appreciate. That motion blur just gets in the way. But once the blur fades and the air clears, you can see and truly appreciate what this game's presentation has to offer. But the unrecognizability factor, we have to address the elephant in the room. It may have the same name, but this is not Crash Bandicoot. Even if you ignore the drastic shift in gameplay, it just doesn't feel like Crash. I don't mind the wacky and occasionally adult sense of humor, but the character designs are completely different to how they were before, and even their personalities have changed. Engine has completely lost his mind, Coco is obsessed with butter, Uka Uka has lost his edge, and Jesus fuck, what the hell happened to Tiny? He's not even the right kind of tiger anymore. Looking at this version of Tiny, it's probably what gender dysphoria feels like. It's the wrong body, it's the wrong voice, it's just not who he is. Story-wise, I think it's okay and fits the world of Crash. I like how they approached it, putting Nina in charge in place of Cortex and taking over his plan to destroy Wampa Island using the Doominator, challenging the well-established Cortex as the main antagonist tradition the series has. Even though Twinsanity already did that, but you know what I mean. I thought that was a really neat idea, and of all the characters, Cortex and Nina are the only ones who feel right. They don't feel unnatural like the others. But this, combined with the totally different style of gameplay, it's just not what Crash Bandicoot is meant to be. The best part of the game is jacking and controlling the Titans. It has nothing to do with Crash Bandicoot. The closest this comes to a traditional Crash game is like riding Polar? And even that is so different to what this game is all about. Crash of the Titans is so far from where we started with this series. Well, the console version at least. The console versions of Crash of the Titans are the least Crash-like Crash games in the series so far. But I think Crash of the Titans on DS does a great job of sticking to what the series is good at and known for. Even though it is still focused on mutants and titans and combat, it has more of the hallmarks of a proper Crash game. In Titans DS, you're going through linear levels looking for crystals and breaking crates and earning gems and completing bonus rounds. It's just more in line with what Crash is, with the added extra layer of a bit of combat. And there are some other bonuses too. You can play as Nina, Dingodile makes an appearance, it has a laugh track, what's not to love? For Crash fans, I would recommend the DS version of Titans over the console versions simply because it's Crash. I don't mean to imply that Crash of the Titans fucked up. I think it's a decent game. It was fun to play through and I enjoyed it. It wasn't perfect, of course, some elements of the gameplay were pretty generic, and sometimes the game felt a little repetitive, but I still enjoyed it for what it was. Jacking Titans was so fun. I loved taking control of a powerful enemy and going on a destructive rampage. I loved the rush of picking up a fat load of mojo. I liked the way it was presented as well, aside from all the stuff that was supposed to be Crash Bandicoot stuff. I think overall, Crash of the Titans is a good game. It's not a great game, but it's a good game. The thing is, it's just not really what I want from a Crash Bandicoot game. I think Crash of the Titans is in the same boat as Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. Nuts and Bolts had a great concept, and it was a lot of fun, but it just isn't Banjo-Kazooie. In the same way, Crash of the Titans has a great concept. Jacking mutants to take control of them and use their powers against your enemies is a really cool idea. But I think the game would have thrived better as an original IP rather than borrowing from and butchering the Crash series. That said, I do think that Crash of the Titans is a good game, and even its DS counterpart is pretty decent as well. It's like I said, change is vital, and even if we don't like that change, it's all worth it in the end. That's not true, but I wanted to end on a positive note, so yeah.